haul video that I wanted to create here on the Owl Kitty channel, and I've got a bunch of them to go through today, and this will be the first and possibly the last book haul video for quite a number of months as we read and read to create some space for the bookshelf here. I'm a big fan of the history of politics and seeing what's been going on, especially in modern political times. And you're going to see a number of figures that have been very influential over the years in this one, and some interesting, I'd say overwhelmingly, very political centric, this book haul. But just to give you guys an idea that I've just finished Rod Little's The Great Betrayal. This is a decent 4.5 hour read, at least my pace. If you really wanted to go back and step back to Theresa May's tenure and how it all went wrong, how she lost her majority, and how we ended up with a very divided parliament today, it's a great little read that you can get invested in. Light reading, but it really kind of depicts what happened after the 2016 referendum and how we've had this real liberal consensus thrusted upon people and made to feel like you're an idiot or you're a racist or whatever for voting Brexit. And it's just been a bizarre 3-point-something years since that vote was casted, and Rod Little does a great job of telling what has been happening. But I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into that because I was following it in real time, week to week, day to day. And this new book from the haul here is Fallout, A Year of Political Mayhem by Tim Shipman. And this really goes into the gravy of Theresa May's time within government. On the day that David Cameron decided to step down, Theresa May winning that leadership bid against the odds perhaps, when we thought it might have been Michael Gove, but then that split vote between Johnson and Gove created Theresa May to come in through the side and easily beat Andrea Leadsom in that one-on-one head-off towards the end. And this should be very interesting indeed. And just a quick nod back to Rod Little's book, there is a beautiful piece of prose from him where he talks about Theresa May constantly going up to the dispatch box, constantly going up to the mantelpiece outside number 10, and just taking a hammering time and time again, refusing to quit despite herself being the only person remaining that wanted to stay in government. And she had a real love for being in government, and that was probably why she was so apprehensive about standing down. But eventually she cracked, and if you remember that very emotional moment, she stood out in number 10. There's a reason for why she got so emotional in the end. But she took an absolute hammering, and Rod Little does a great description of that moment, and I heavily recommend just reading the book for that moment alone. The way he depicts it is absolutely fantastic. So this really goes into what eventually has happened pretty much since that referendum debate, how we now have a very inadequate parliament as things currently stand. It's a great thing to potentially go through if you've got time before the December 12 election happens to revisit this. But it talks about Theresa May, how things went potentially wrong, and largely, I mean, you just have to look at that manifesto again if you can go back. It wasn't written by May. It was written by two colleagues that aren't widely revered within the Conservative government as being trustworthy people to work along with. That manifesto, which was absolutely ridiculous, and a couple of headline ones just to remember. They were going to scrap winter fuel payments for the elderly. They were going to make fox hunting legal again. I mean, who's going to vote for the Conservatives when they take those type of policies? It was awful. Juxtapose that with the written on the back of a fag packet manifesto from Jeremy Corbyn at the time, who was offering 4 extra bank holiday days. Who doesn't want that? What an unbelievable thing to have. But in reality, how many businesses are really going to get behind that? It's the same things happened in this election. Same things happened this year. We're going to privatise BT and give everyone free broadband. Unreal. It's again a fag packet manifesto from Labour again this year, and people are just not falling for it, or at least anyone over the age of 20 is not falling for that manifesto, which they just simply cannot deliver without bankrupting the country, or viably deliver anyway. But it's going to be an interesting read, this, and I will come back and give you my thoughts of Fallout. It's a chunky read as well. Father of the House of Commons, Ken Clarke, is obviously going to be stepping down from government, but he has been in government for such a long period of time. and I'm not necessarily that happy with the way Ken Clarke has coordinated himself over the last 3 or so years within the Houses of Parliament, but there's no doubt about it, he is a political legend to the likes of Mo Mowlam. And Ken Clarke has a book called Kind of Blue, and this is a political memoir from him, and it'll be an interesting read to see his time within government, the interesting aspects that he's been involved in. And I'm a big fan of Ian Dale, a presenter on LBC, former MP for the Conservatives, and he's wrote a blurb here on the book: like a fine old wine, this book is to be savoured. It is resplendent with amusing anecdotes, and it leaves the reader wanting more. So hopefully it delivers. When we're going to get round to that again, not sure, but we are pummeling through the books at the moment anyway. Now, I didn't want it to all be political, because just you need to give yourself a little bit of a break from it. And I got Clive James's Play All. Now, you may remember Clive James from when he used to be a bit of a film critic, and he did a whole bunch of TV back in the 90s and the 80s. You don't really see him anymore, but he really just was fantastic in his presentation and his knowledge within the TV and film industry. And this book is his notebook, his binge watcher's notebook, and he mainly comments on a couple of TV series here: Game of Thrones, Band of Brothers, The West Wing, The Sopranos, a few more in there as well. And I'd be really interested to get his take on what he thought about those long-running series, and I just thought it would be a nice little break from all the political stuff that I've been looking at least in the recent couple of weeks. Now, after that, we're going to have to move on to another book which is very political. Again, pick this up very, very cheap at £1.25, and there's a reason for it, because it's Anne Widdecombe.
May I say that if I needed any convincing at all, that the best thing for Britain is to leave here as soon as possible. It was the way that those elections were conducted yesterday. Because if that is this place's idea of democracy, then that is a serious betrayal of every country that is represented here. Because it is not democratic at all.
Anne Widdecombe has obviously left the Conservative Party and is now an MEP for the Brexit Party. This is her autobiography. She was a bit of a, I wouldn't say a shock jock within Parliament, but she has very traditionalist values, and a lot of values that I don't agree with, but it'd be very interesting to see what she has to say. She may be more known to you guys from her time on Strictly Come Dancing, but either way, it should be an interesting read, and I'd be interested to see whether this actually came out. I've got a feeling this was published prior to her getting back into politics with the Brexit Party itself, but it should give you an idea of where her thoughts and minds are surrounding the future of our country and our relationship with the European Union. Next up, we have a memoir from Sue Perkins. This is Sue Perkins' Spectacles memoir book, and it is a bit of an autobiography, maybe not chronologically done, but I'm a big fan of Sue Perkins, especially back when she kick-started her career. I think she did The Morning Lunch was the name of the programme, or something similar to that. That's where I first heard of Sue Perkins, before she started doing anything in relation to the more mainstream stuff that she does today. But I thought it would be an interesting read. I like autobiographies, and that one, I just had to pick it up. Next up is a book by Giselle Scanlon called The Goddess Experience, and as you can see that, if we can get the camera to focus in beyond my face, it's some very, very, very nice artwork on this, with a lovely little bookmark in the middle as well, and I'll show you just some of the artwork in this piece is very, very good. And I kind of got attracted by the artwork itself, and for me, I think what made me get this book was just some interesting bits and pieces in there. So for instance, why do we stay brand loyal? Why are we brand loyal to certain brands? Seems to be quite fashion centric as well. Talks about all sorts of different things. But yeah, should be an interesting read. Not usually the sort of stuff that I read, but it does look like it could be quite an interesting one. And maybe I'll come back for comment on that at a future time. Not my speciality, of course. Next up is another political book, and it actually has another MP that's standing down. And actually, it's from the party that I'm not a massive fan of, the Labour Party, but I always think that, you know, I can find myself potentially veering into getting into an echo chamber, and I try where I can, and maybe don't try enough to try and hear from the other side. So I decided to actually pick up a book here called Dial M for Murdoch, which actually has MP, or at least until the end of this year, Tom Watson has penned this with Martin Hickman, and this is all about Rupert Murdoch and what happened with the phone hacking scandal going back to, what was it, the early 2000s? Something like that. This should be very interesting read as well, and it has a whole bunch of stuff in there that should be very interesting, because they want to take, even right now, Tom Watson wants to take it to Rupert Murdoch at Fox, and I think they were probably very happy to see that Fox is pretty much out of Sky now, and it's owned by NBC Universal instead. But it should be interesting, because I also watched recently a 5 or 6 part Sky Atlantic kind of documentary, not a documentary itself, but it was a biopic of Roger Ailes, who was the former executive of Fox News back when the Iraq War came out, or back when the Iraq War was happening rather, and that was very, very interesting indeed. And this should be interesting as well, because it was Rupert Murdoch in that series that seemed like he was the guy with rationale, saw that Roger Ailes was overstepping his boundaries, and this should be interesting as well. And lastly, we have a book from a very liberal commentator at the moment, Robert Peston. Not a massive fan of this guy at all, but I'd be interested to see what his worldview is. And this is his book, WTF. What have we done? Why did it happen? How do we take back control? This could be a stomach-churning read for me. We'll have to see. But it is interesting to see how the minds work of those that work in the media, those that are in their own bubble around London, where they don't understand what's happening in the heartlands of this country and the working class of this country. They seem to be very detached from why people voted for Brexit in the first place. So it'd be interesting to see how Robert Peston's brain works in this particular book itself. So that's pretty much the book haul done, and there won't be one till probably some point next year, maybe April, maybe May next year. Now I imagine there's a few book purchases on my radar that I do want to get, which I'm not going to get because you never know, Christmas is coming up. One of those being, of course, Tyson Fury's autobiography has released in the past week, and that is going to be a compelling read, especially with his issues surrounding dealing with mental health problems, and his resurgence from being a very controversial figure, learning from that. I still think he has very traditionalist values, and you know, power to him for that, but I think he has learned from his, I almost feel like he had to do something like that to build up his profile, to get on the radar, that you see certain people like the likes of Katie Hopkins and other people that use that type of strategy to get known in the media, and then Tyson Fury, what an unbelievable comeback, from weighing, I think 20, I can't remember the exact amount that he ended up weighing, but losing complete control of his life and turning it back, and now he is vying for that fight for Deontay Wilder for early 2020, which should be very interesting indeed. But either way, we'll see what happens. If I do get that at some point, I would definitely love to read it before his next fight with Wilder. Anyway, that's enough from me. Yeah, sound off if you have any particular book recommendations. I am a non-fiction reader predominantly, and I do like just, I don't know, people's opinions and stuff like that on culture. You know, give you an example, for instance, Douglas Murray, great author in my view. Just that type of stuff. I like a bit of travel stuff as well. But anyway, it's nearly 20 minutes. I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.